We'll begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. What a great slate of witnesses this morning. Thanks to each and every one of you for your very in-depth testimony. This is refreshing. Thank you. I will start with the CBTU, of course. As a Shadow Minister for Labour, you had my ear on very many fronts. Mr. Gordon, you spoke about qualified incentives. Can you give a couple of examples of what these qualified incentives should look like in the future, what it looks like today and what it needs to look like in the future to overcome these obstacles?
Thank you again for the opportunity to address you. I'll speak to past experience directly and through our membership communicated to us. In the past, there's been, and current incentives have a lot of potential, but there was issues with individuals in associations that became a prerequisite, and if I could call it, these associations acted as gatekeepers to access federal and provincial grant incentives for building retrofits. This became problematic in one context. Without taking a 1-week course that was delivered for profit by these associations, 5-year apprentice trades that include the scope of practice were actually excluded from being able to offer these very same incentives to their clients. So this was a very big problem. I think what we would like to see is that future incentives address that, these retrofits be performed by qualified people. And another layer to that is that these systems that were performed in the news and in various reports and newspapers were shown to be faulty in many instances, and causes a lack of trust from the government to, go down this road of retrofitting with these new technologies, which is, we only get one opportunity to do it right.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. So what I heard you say is remove the gatekeepers. I've heard that before. Ms. Rhahmati, you had spoke about natural disasters and having to pick up a workforce from Ontario as an example and get them out to BC for wildfires or floods. Of course, my bill C-241, which is now passed the House of Commons into the Senate, the mobility tax deduction will help get people to these places. But then there was talked about new training models as well. And I'm a big advocate that we need to start our training in the school systems in the early years, because the same child that plays with a Tonka truck in a sandbox at 3 and 4, for some strange reason at 5 and 6 and 7, they're told they need to be doctors or lawyers and, Lord forbid, politicians, or they're nothing. Can you tell me, this new training models, is that what you're talking about specifically, or what specifically are you speaking to?
First off, congratulations, Mr. Lewis, on your bill. And what I was referring to is, I think, a bit more of interprovincial mobility as well. So, for example, if you're in northern BC, having to go down to southern BC to help with a disaster, and things like your mobility tax deduction will assist with that. And then when it comes to training, what I was referring to in part of my remarks was about, as we're transitioning to sort of net zero, making sure that workers have the skills that they need to be able to continue to do their work and build our buildings with more energy efficient standards, for example, or move from traditional oil and gas jobs to the new sort of industry. And maybe I'll pass it over to Mike, because Mike is a training director, to see if you have anything else to add to that as well.
Thank you, Rita. I can add to that. I would say, for example, let's not take 2 steps backward before we can take a step forward. When we look at hydrogen, that's another form of fuel. We have 57,000 capable and able-bodied people here in Canada that specialize in that type of equipment as far as the fuels industry. To be able to retrain, you just have to adjust to the different characteristics of that fuel, and they would have tens or decades of experience to be able to move forward and carry that experience to provide value.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Thank you, Ms. Rhahmati. I appreciate it. I have a lot more questions for you, but I am going to move on. Mr. Lee, regarding the cost of housing, so we know it to be true that 9 out of 10 young adults don't believe they'll ever be able to afford a home here in Canada. And so you had mentioned about unintended risks and consequences. And so as we change and adapt for climate change, specifically for homes, and knowing that the price of a home and the lack of homes is driving up costs, what exactly are those unintended risks, and how do you believe they will directly affect a young adult purchasing a home and starting a family?
Well,
the house operates as a system. And so when you make certain changes to it, so for example, an easy one that people would understand, when you tighten a home for air tightness, you need to add ventilation, and you put on heat recovery so that you still have fresh air, but now you have a more energy efficient home. But if you thought, well, I'm just going to tighten my home without adding that, then you create unintended consequences, health issues. And the same holds true for many other things. You know, the example of adding more insulation and air tightness is good for extreme heat, but only if you have air conditioning. And it helps your air conditioner be more efficient, but if you just have a super efficient, what we're seeing with super efficient homes, which we have a net zero energy council, we've labeled over 1,200 net zero homes in Canada. We're working hard to get this right, but we're finding that super energy efficient homes can also overheat more easily. So you have to adjust, you have to create overhangs, you probably have to put in air conditioning, those types of things. And there are other things that you do to prevent fire. There's issues in Western Canada with what's called attic rain, from one municipality creating a bylaw to stop one thing that resulted in another issue. So you just need to make sure your code changes are really well thought through. You do your cross-disciplinary work so that your house continues to work as intended.
Jolie, thank you, Mr.